Castlevania Nocturne. I'm gonna be honest, if I hadn't seen someone talk about this like a week ago, I probably would have forgotten that it had released. Needless to say, I was not following this very closely at all. I saw the trailer when it debuted like a couple months ago. Looked fine, looked interesting. I didn't see anything after that, didn't follow any of the interviews behind the scenes material that they may or may not have put in. I just, decided to watch it because I had some time to kill, and I could think of worse ways to kill it than watching some Castlevania. And generally speaking, I was very pleased with, I guess, the original run of Netflix Castlevania. First season, pretty solid introduction. You could kind of tell that they repurposed like a direct to DVD movie plot for it. Second season, stronger still. Didn't really like the third one, felt kind of like filler and kind of like dicking around, but they course corrected with the fourth season, and I generally felt that that season was able to resolve a lot of the plot points and character arcs in a fairly satisfying manner. So I wasn't exactly starving for more Castlevania after the fourth season, basically left off the characters in a more or less fine place. Right off the bat, I do like the fact that this is set centuries and centuries after the first four seasons, which were a very loose adaptation of Castlevania 3. This one is also a very loose adaptation of, I guess, Symphony of the Night, Rondo of Blood, and some of the DS games, if I can recall the elements correctly. It's its own thing. There are going to be quite a few elements here that are like the games, but the games themselves, like Castlevania, never had a super involved plot line or characterization, so whenever you have to adapt something like that, that's kind of like paper thin in terms of its source material, you're always going to have to include and interpret a bunch of things. And through the next few minutes, I'm going to try and articulate whether or not that they were successful in this. So this is kind of like my initial non-spoiler review. Generally, I have some problems with some of the themes, how the show deals with them more specifically, but it's a pretty solid first season. I generally like the cast. I like the plot line that they set up. The animation, I feel, is actually quite a bit improved from the first four seasons, which could kind of look weird and janky sometimes. In terms of fluidity, the action set pieces are very good. And if you're a fan of Castlevania, I will say you're probably gonna like this, especially if you liked the prior Netflix seasons. If you're someone who's like super into the lore of the games, a lot of the reinterpretations here are just outright massive character overhauls and story overhauls are probably gonna annoy the shit out of you, and I don't think that's going to change in preceding seasons. But generally, it's a good enough time. It's a solid animated series. I don't regret spending the time I watched with it, and it does some things better than a lot of attempted sequels to a prior thing do, and I'm going to explain that in the following spoiler section. So if you don't want to be spoiled, please kindly fuck off from the video right now. So, the plot of this season is it's set during the French Revolution, or I believe sometime shortly thereafter. France is in turmoil, the old order is being basically tossed aside, which means that a lot of humans, and especially a lot of vampires who were used to the things were run before, are getting their asses kicked. And both some of the humans and a lot of the vampires are not a fan of this. They want to not only maintain the order that exists, but they want to upheave it in their own way and start a new order where the vampires are the true top dogs of the world, rather than this kind of secret codependence, very light Vampire the Masquerade bullshit that had been going on so far. And our main characters, Maria, Annette, Richter Belmont, descendant of the Belmont clan, of course, Tara, and a few others find themselves embroiled in this mess as it slowly but surely escalates into a big ass catastrophe that makes kind of the first four seasons look kind of tame by comparison. The very first thing that I want to praise for the show is generally the cast. I think the cast in this show avoids a big problem that a lot of sequels fail to do. A lot of times, when a sequel comes out to a prior story, they have a lot of trouble making the new characters as interesting as the guys who came before. And often the new guys can feel just like cheap imitations of the prior characters, or they can feel like they're kind of a half-ass, that they don't have the charm of the originals. But comparing specifically Trevor and Richter Belmont, these guys are very different people. On the surface, they look the same. They do have some of the same elements, but Trevor was a broken down, jaded, world weary man who is quite a bit older, I feel, than Richter is in this show. Richter's only 19. He's barely a grown ass man, and he still has a lot of personal issues to deal with. Whereas Trevor had seen some shit, he'd done some shit, he was pretty burned out by the time we were introduced to him, and these differences are highlighted a lot as the season goes on. There are a lot of things that Richter does in this show that Trevor never would have done, or Trevor could have done, but it would have taken a long ass time, a lot of personal growth and maturation to do. Richter is inherently a much more vulnerable guy. He has a lot of unresolved issues. He is not jaded at the world. He only likes to pretend that he is, but he is quite often a much more, I want to say, sensitive soul than Trevor was. He's much more in tune with what other people think about him, what he thinks about himself. He's more easily able to express himself, and he's more willing to express himself. And I think that this makes him inherently stand as his own person instead of coming off as a cheap copy of Trevor. And I actually like the arc that they give him, kind of dealing with not necessarily the pressure of the Belmont clan, but to kind of make peace with himself, with his own fuck-ups. Trevor was a guy who was fucked over by the world. Richter is a guy who fucked over his own world in an act of understandable stupidity as a child, and he has to accept what has happened, what he's done, and just grow and move on from it. And I think the show executes that arc for him very, very well. The next character I like is actually Annette. Now, Annette is a complete rewrite of the original version. Not that the original version had much character, but here she's an ex-Caribbean slave who was held in a plantation by a vampire, and he's kind of like a minor antagonist in the show itself. The angle they take with Annette is that she comes from a people that have magic rooted in, I believe, Caribbean gods. I didn't do the research too much. I don't know if they're like actual gods that exist in our world or it's something the show invented. But she does have these abilities, and the show does uses a lot of time to build up this culture, to make them interesting and cool, and they do that very, very well. And Annette is a very interesting parallel to Richter, where her life was much, much shittier than Richter's, generally speaking, and it has given her a bit more insight into the cruelties of the world, but it's also made her kind of less of an empathetic person. Annette has a moment that is very clearly supposed to mirror Richter's fuck-up as a child, but she does it as an adult. And when Richter shows fear at encountering the vampire that murdered his mom, Annette spends quite a few episodes being not understandable to his plight in the least. She's not empathetic to him. She considers him a coward and weakling for that. And ordinarily, this, in kind of a shittier show, this would be the point where Richter would say, yeah, I'm a fucking pussy for this. I should not do that. But no, the show actually highlights something that most fiction I notice doesn't do that. Annette is an angry person. That anger gives her focus. It gives her strength, but it's not the source of her strength. The source of her strength comes from her heritage, her connection to other people, what she fights for. She fights for them. She fights not to avenge herself or others. She fights to, help people. And through that little arc of her own, she comes to realize that she should not be so quick to judge everyone else who hasn't suffered as bad as her to be a total fucking pussy coward just because they show fear. Because as she comes to learn, if you're afraid of something, that actually means that you actually value something or someone else, and you're afraid of losing them. And I like that the show highlights this. A lot of the time, a character's anger is just the source of everything about them, but here, it's an aspect to her personality, but it's not something that she should allow to control her. And I think the show does a good job of illustrating this fact. Likewise, I think Tara was actually my favorite character. She is reinterpreted to be Maria's mom in this version. She's an ex-speaker who escaped from Russia after a bloody vampire massacre of her people, and I think it was a really good idea to make one of the main cast be someone middle-aged, someone who's got a bigger history. Like, Richter's 19, Annette is probably like 19, 20, maybe a little bit older than him. Maria is like a teenager, maybe 14, 15, something like that. These are all much younger, less experienced characters than the cast of the original 4 seasons. And so I think giving them an older character to kind of serve as a caretaker figure, a mentor figure, someone who's been here for like 40, 45 years helps give some of the world a bit more texture, a little bit more backstory, history in general. And she was easily one of the most sympathetic characters, or probably the most sympathetic one I found in the whole season. And one of the things that I do want to watch following seasons for is to see how her tragic storyline develops. She gets really fucked up here, and her ending is pretty damn heartbreaking, and I want to see what they do with Vampire Tara moving forward. Like, her becoming the thing that she was so deathly afraid of becoming is going to make for some delicious drama if they execute it well. Maria is the worst character, I feel. She is basically an atheist Redditor showing up in the French Revolution. Sometimes she is sympathetic, sometimes she works. Like, when she's just bantering with Richter or her mom or even Annette, it's fine. But the show really treats her like it's fucking Lisa Simpson equivalent, where she's constantly shitting on the Catholic Church. She basically all but says that the church is fucking useless and the revolution is right to fucking burn it down and kill everyone associated with it. She doesn't go quite that far, but just like half a fucking step from it. And look, I've read my fair share of history books. I know the Catholic Church is shit. Hell, if I stepped into a church, I'm pretty sure I'd spontaneously fucking combust or something. But the whole vitriol that Maria has and this whole show has for the Catholic Church is really kind of sometimes laughably hilarious and often very cringeworthy, because this show is capable of being really thoughtful and layered about its characters, its themes and ideas, like what I talked about with Annette, with Richter, the way Annette's gods and faith are handled. That's all very layered and interesting. And even the fucking vampire characters are shown to have either humanity or their own aspirations. They're not all kid murdering puppy punchers. A few of them actually do have like the capacity to love other people, even other humans or other vampires. They have like objectives that aren't just let's take over the world and fucking kill people indefinitely. But when it comes to the Catholic Church, basically every representative of it is just an asshole or a massive hypocrite. There's no one to kind of serve as an exemplar of what the Catholic Church should be if it was led properly, and the show really lays into this shit. It gets kind of grating, honestly, that the show isn't able to say, yeah, the institution of the Catholic Church is fucked, which it is, but it also can't ever really say something like, yeah, the institution is shit, but, you know, the tenets of the church are good. Like, what's the fuck's the problem with thou shalt not steal, or thou shalt not kill, or hurt thy neighbor, or don't do unto others what you wouldn't want to be done to yourself? I don't see the problem with that. But the show clearly doesn't. The show basically screams from the top of its fucking lungs, usually through Maria, that, morality that's, based on religion is fucking dumb. If you value that shit, you're basically a moron. And, we'll be fine if we just completely get rid of that. Like, can these fucking idiots that work in the entertainment industry actually, like, read a fucking history book and see the tightly knit relationship that religion and, basic moral beliefs, like, the reason why a lot of cultures, or rather all cultures, have some kind of idea of what morality is, frequently comes from or is very, very heavily influenced by their fucking religion. Not just Catholicism, but by Islam, Buddhism, Taoism, all this shit. It's all rooted in some way in religion, and the show is just really meme worthy when it comes to that subject matter. And that's basically my biggest complaint, next to the villains. The villains, they aren't great. The villains are kind of an example of what I talked about with the main cast. So the main cast generally do a good job of differentiating themselves from the old characters, even Maria. There was no one really like Maria in the first 4 seasons, but the villains here, like Dracula was a sympathetic character, Carmilla was basically an asshole who wanted to take revenge on the whole world for slights that were done against her, and the villains here, they're basically mustache twirling supervillains. They're ridiculously evil, like absurd fucking assholes. And it will be fun, and it is fun to see them get their asses kicked, but as characters, they're pretty one-dimensional, and they're not really that interesting. I think if these guys didn't have as good as designs visually as they do, and weren't as voice acted as well as they were, they would be considerably more mid than they already are. Well, on the topic of the visuals and the action, like I said, I think the visuals and action are generally much stronger here than in the first 4 seasons. The storyboarding is much more interesting, the way scenes are framed, the use of shadows. There's a big focus on characters and their eyes. Often these characters are able to tell you a whole swath of emotions just from a single look in their eyes, and the camera focuses on the eyes on everybody very, very frequently. I think the character designs are a step up from the prior seasons as well. They're more expressive. They do a good job of being distinct, but not so detailed that they get in the way of the character being instantly recognizable. Once again, I think Tara is the best designed out of the characters, but Richter's design actually translates pretty fucking well, considering the fact that he's basically like a martial arts dude that's kind of like LARPing as an 18th century dude. They managed to pull his design off fairly well. The Night Creature designs aren't as crazy good as in the prior seasons. Like some of Isaac and Hector's shit from seasons 3 and 4 was pretty nasty and pretty cool looking. The Night Creatures here generally aren't on par with that. But in terms of fluidity, the action sequences much more fluid here. There's much more interesting choreography being used. The special effects complement the action, the way teleportation is showcased. Annette like smashing a rock into dust and then reconstituting it into daggers and shields or even spears and swords. All that shit is really damn good. And I think the scene with her skewering while letting the vampire who terrorized her as a child burn to death is executed perfectly. Storyboarding, animation, the way the light works, the way they show him just reeling in pain. Like, they kind of drop the frame rate, I suppose, a little bit so that every movement of his is kind of extra emphasized and exaggerated, and the way he just bursts is great stuff. Great stuff. So yeah, generally speaking, I think this is a solid first entry in what I assume is going to be like a multi-season storyline with this cast of characters. I'm interested what they're going to do moving forward, especially with the ending such as it is. I really hope that they give Maria some more personality instead of just being atheist redditor. Like I said, she gets one note way too much. She kind of lacks depth in comparison to the other characters. And I do hope that moving forward, the villains also get spiced up a little bit so they get more interesting. With Tara joining the villain side by basically becoming a vampire, I'm expecting a lot of really spicy drama out of that, and I hope they utilize it to its fullest potential. So yeah, Castlevania Nocturne, solid series. Interested in what they're going to do. I'm going to watch in like a couple years when the next season drops, I guess. And yeah, had fun with it. Would recommend.